You might have heard about this through a Cracked article back in the day, but a prequel was written in 1989 called Toon Platoon. This script was set during World War II and tells the story of Roger's origin and how he was raised by a human family and eventually shipped off to fight in the war. That's right, a comic romp featuring Toons fighting the Nazis. Sounds awesome. Also, Jessica is kidnapped and forced to spew Tokyo Rose-style propaganda on the radio. And no wonder Spielberg hated this draft. Another draft was written called Who Discovered Roger Rabbit, which was much tamer and traditional. The main thing of note from these scripts is the ending where it's revealed that Bugs Bunny is Roger Rabbit's father. This script has remained in production hell for over 30 years, as both Amblin and Disney had to agree to greenlight it. It never got greenlit. Who Framed Roger Rabbit is actually based on a 1981 novel written by Gary K. Wolfe called Who Censored Roger Rabbit. The movie borrows very little from the book, pretty much only the characters' names and one single line where Baby Herman says, "I have the lust of a 50-year-old man and a 3-year-old dinky." That's it. That's all he used from the book. And for years, Eisner thought this book was just ripe for making into a Hollywood blockbuster. I just want to take a moment to go over the plot of Who Censored Roger Rabbit as fast and concise as I can. Shout out to the author Gary K. Wolfe and all. We'll talk a little bit more about him later on. But frankly, you really don't need to read this book. First off, the prose in this novel is annoying. It's written entirely in this weird 1940s slang and puns that get old after page 3. In the novel, Roger Rabbit is a complete scumbag who hires Eddie Valiant to spy on his bosses, who have been refusing to give Roger his own comic strip. Oh, I forgot to mention, the book doesn't even have any cartoons at all. Instead, it's about newspaper comic strips. So, all the cartoons speak silently through word bubbles, like they would in a strip. Yay, more plot points. Anyways, Roger ends up getting shot and killed. Yeah, Toons can just get killed in this universe, but somehow leaves a censored speech bubble over his corpse along with a clone of himself. Yeah, a clone. And this is where I started to get lost. Toons can create clones in this universe for some reason. I don't know why. Roger's boss is then killed, and Roger is framed even though Roger is already dead since his clone was apparently seen at the crime. All right, so the clone of Roger goes to Eddie and enlists his help. And Eddie decides to help for reasons. Eddie investigates Jessica and Baby Herman along with a photographer who doesn't appear anywhere in the movie. And they all just generally think that Roger is a poo-poo head. Here's where it gets super weird. Throughout the book, there's this constant talk about some kettle or something. Turns out the kettle is a genie lamp. Yeah, they put a genie in this. So what had happened was Roger accidentally sat on the kettle while habitually singing his favorite song, When You Wish Upon a Star, which coincidentally was the magic word to make a wish from the genie. Then Roger just happened to mutter that he wished for fame and a hot wife, which the genie grants him and is the reason for his success. But, and here's where it gets more complicated, the genie is apparently an asshole because everybody in the book is just horrible and will kill anyone who sees him. So, Roger apparently accidentally rubbed the lamp, didn't see the genie, muttered a wish, and walked away before seeing the genie. Okay, I think I'm following along. Oh, also the genie killed one of Roger's bosses. Forgot to mention that, but who cares? I'm too confused anyway. So after all that is revealed, it turns out the original Roger Rabbit had actually killed one of his bosses because he thought he was cheating with Jessica and had made a clone as an alibi. Before getting away, though, he accidentally rubbed the genie's lamp again and was killed by the genie. The clone finally admits this to Eddie at the end before evaporating away because apparently that's what Toons clones do for some reason. The end. So yeah, not my favorite book I've ever read. It's definitely no Go Dog Go. but it seems like Gary K. Wolf is an interesting guy. More on him later. Roger Rabbit had one of the longest post-production timelines of all time. Because CGI animation was not viable at the time, every single frame of film that included animation had to be hand-painted onto film, along with other effects processes done by Lucas's ILM, which provided the highlights and shadows. This required an ungodly amount of animators led by the legendary Richard Williams. Richard Williams is known for his intricate and complex animation, which was featured in renowned adaptations of A Christmas Carol and Raggedy Ann, along with commercials for Chicago's WGN. We have a lot to discuss about Richard Williams in a later entry, but bottom line, Roger Rabbit had one of the most hellish post-production cycles of all time. Dealing with Zemeckis' dynamic camera movements proved to be very challenging for the team of animators, and with each frame requiring movie-like drawings, the animating process was grueling and long. However, I have found some great blogs and stories from former animators who worked on the film who seem to be very proud of their work on it. I'll link some of that in the description. Because of the unorthodox post-production process and the numerous adjustments made both on and off set, it was no surprise that when Roger Rabbit was released, it had... It's no wonder Roger Rabbit had the longest end credits at the time when it came out. The credits spanned over 10 minutes, lots of animators, designers, and property creators to credit. It is strange, though, that... I think it's almost safe to say that Jessica Rabbit is more well-known than Roger Rabbit at this point. Her entry on stage might be the most famous scene in the movie, and one of the most overused comments in any video featuring her is, "This is how I reach puberty," or something. Jessica Rabbit is absolutely iconic. So why did Kathleen Turner go uncredited? Simply put, she just didn't think she put in that much work for the role. She did the role as a favor for Robert Zemeckis, who had starred her in Romance in the Stone. Apparently she was pregnant during the voiceover, and said recording was quick and easy favor she didn't think much of at the time. There may have been some sort of contractual issues or something, as she was starring in 4 other documentaries at the time, but it just seems like she was busy with a newborn and didn't much care about the credit. Turner looks back fondly on her role as Jessica. Oh, by the way, Spielberg's wife at the time, Amy Irvin, provides the sing-in voice for Jessica. Fun fact. While we're on the topic of Jessica, let's talk about that dress, girl. Jessica's dress is one of the most famous movie outfits in my opinion. So much so that a red strapless dress with a high slit is pretty much synonymous with her. Add purple gloves and a red wig and boom, you're ready for sexy Halloween. But what makes Jessica's dress sparkle that way? Animators shined a light through a plastic bag that had been distressed with steel wool.
I want to be 19 now, Daddy, don't be mean, hey, woo!
Any fan of old Tex Avery cartoons will probably recognize that Jessica Rabbit's scene is very much inspired by Red Hot Riding Hood.
I'd be a great sensation.
Women can't live without them. Or can you?
Not much to say about this one. Robot Chicken made a parody sketch that mixes Roger Rabbit up with O.J. Simpson in the plot of Strangers on a Train for some reason. And like most of Robot Chicken's sketches, it just offers more evidence that Gen Xers' humor is high-key cringe. Remember how I said it seemed that the crew did not appreciate Charles Fleischer dressed as a bunny on set? Well, it's probably because production on this set was an intricate, existential nightmare. You see, despite taking place in LA, most of Roger Rabbit was filmed and animated in the UK, mostly because Richard Williams refused to work in LA. This meant nearly all of the live action scenes were filmed at L Street Studios, while other more serious films were being produced. The overall mood on set was that they were working on a weird kids movie featuring murder, infidelity, alcoholism, based on some odd novel endorsed by Michael Eisner of all people. It was understandable to wonder who the hell this movie was made for. And while we admire the creativity, problem solving, and the attention to detail shown throughout this movie, along with Bob Hoskins' just perfect performance as Eddie, you gotta think about the shell shock the crew must have been going through as they figured out ways to seamlessly blend animation with live action. It's almost as if this production was simply way ahead of its time, as the CGI effects and green screen are pretty much commonplace on every single movie set nowadays. Except with Roger Rabbit's production, they had the animated assets fully interact with real live props, which actually highlights the work put in. They say good effects are those that you don't even really notice, but a ton of the charm that comes from Who Framed Roger Rabbit is the fact that not only do you notice the effects, but you find appreciation for the little extra touches the live action crew worked on. But think about how unconventional yet mundane filming this movie must have been. You spend 30 takes trying to make sure a coat rack shakes just the right way, and then there's Charlie Fleischer going on set. Yeah, I don't think I'd be in the mood either. Filming in the UK took 7.5 months with an additional month in LA for the Toontown scenes. The budget was over $50 million, a little over $100 million adjusted for inflation, which today might not seem unheard of, but back then was way too large of a budget for an unproven IP and a huge pressure builder for everyone involved. Once the movie was finally done, they made the brilliant decision to screen the movie to a test audience full of teenagers who predictably hated the movie. Luckily, Zemeckis did not change anything after the test screening, but that could not have been good for their confidence going into opening day. When Roger Rabbit was finally released, it topped box office with $11 million and then made even more money over the 4th of July weekend with over $14 million. And then $11.5 million the week after. Roger Rabbit is also one of the rare movies to open at number 1 and then reappear at number 1 box office spot weeks after its release. This movie had some major legs and stayed in theaters for longer than usual thanks to great word of mouth and consistent sales. Mickey Mouse and Bugs Bunny are perhaps the biggest stars this movie was able to borrow for a relatively cheap price. But there was one important factor to the deal. Bugs and Mickey had to have the same exact screen time. Well, there's only 2 scenes they're in prominently, when Eddie is fallen and at the end when they arrive with the group of Toons. During the final scenes, it's pretty easy to keep them both in frame anytime one of them is shown, but during the fallen scene, you'll notice that Mickey comes in first. This gives Mickey about a second or 2 more screen time than Bugs during this scene. Well, look for Bugs earlier in the movie while Eddie walks around the Maroon Cartoons lot. For a brief moment, you can see Bugs walk into frame before the scene changes. They compensated Mickey's extra second of screen time with this short insert, and now you'll always notice that. Okay, I find this one to be a bigger deal than the Jessica Rabbit frame, but nobody talks about this one. First off, special shout out to the blog Pulling a Rabbit Out of the Hat, which I actually got a lot of information from for this whole video. It's a pretty awesome site dedicated to people who made Roger Rabbit, specifically the animators and storyboard artists and such. Now from the blog, quote, Betty Boop was to have a much larger role in Who Framed Roger Rabbit. She was to have had an affair with Eddie Valiant. There are still hints of a shared past in the ink and paint club sequence. Zemeckis was determined to include an homage to the early animators by including a single Betty Boop nipple slip frame. Bob Zemeckis developed a real appreciation for vintage cartoons. The very early animators knew that their films would only be seen on a theater screen for a period of weeks and likely never be seen again. Film rolls at 24 frames per second, and a single frame cannot be perceived consciously. There was little in the way of downstream check-in in those days, so animators would occasionally slip in an irregular frame. Animator Roger Chastain was instructed to include one frame with nipples shown as Betty fidgeted with the hem of her dress. The drawing proceeded through cleanup, trace and paint, xerography, and check-in with the note attached, Bob Z wants his boob shot for one frame. It was in the theatrical release and the original Laserdisc release, but was removed in subsequent VHS, DVD, and Blu-ray releases. There wasn't much to see, although the nipples were drawn like cute little pie eyes of vintage Mickey Mouse cartoons. That's right, Zemeckis made sure that there was a frame of Betty Boop's nips slipped into the movie. And that frame is much more damning than Jessica's upskirt, in my opinion. Like, there is no doubt we are looking at some nips here. There is also a few sketches of Jessica's nips shown during the booby trap scene, but those never made it past the first tracing. And by the way, I don't want to downplay the fact that Betty Boop's nip went through 4 different phases of production. Also, Eddie having an affair with Betty Boop? All right then. One of my favorite jokes in the movie is the phrase, "For a good time, call Alice in Wonderland," written on the bathroom wall in Toontown. In the theatrical release, there was a phone number next to the graffiti, which supposedly was Michael Eisner's actual phone number. No evidence of the phone number seems to exist. Who Framed Roger Rabbit did not come with many deleted scenes. I mean, how many scenes are you gonna delete when you spend this much on props and animation? The most famous and complete deleted scene is a scene where the weasels threaten Eddie by fitting him with a cartoon pig head that he ends up dipping away in the shower. It's a fairly horrifying scene, as most scenes that involve dip are, and doesn't add much to the movie besides another pseudo-reference to Chinatown. It ends with Jessica entering his office, which is why he is shown coming out of the bathroom shirtless, right after his shower. A quick one here, it's just a location note. The tunnel to Toontown is the same tunnel used in another Zemeckis movie, Back to the Future 2, during the hoverboard chase. It is also used in War Games. Also in the OC when Marissa dies. The tunnel is located in Griffith Park in Los Angeles. Roger's outfit is based on many different well-known characters. He has Mickey Mouse's gloves, Goofy's pants, Pinocchio's bow tie, Sylvester's head and nose, Wile E. Coyote's cheeks, and Droopy's hair. Richard Williams also describes Roger's color scheme as subliminally representing the American flag. Kinda hard to tell because Judge Doom mostly wears glasses, but according to tremendous amounts of people, Christopher Lloyd never blinked once while in character as Judge Doom. Kind of a silly, spooky one, but try to find any shots of him blinking. So hey, how you holding up? I mean, we're pretty far in now, aren't we? I mean, thanks for hanging in there. I really appreciate it. So, do you remember what this movie is about? It's about a freeway. Yeah, even though we think of the dueling piano scene or Jessica Rabbit or even just the overall grimy, toony aesthetic when we think of Who Framed Roger Rabbit, the ultimate reveal is that Judge Doom's plan is to build a freeway through Toontown. That's right, the I-10 freeway. Sure, in the movie, the Toons end up with Marvin Acme's will, which probably doesn't mean squat because it was written in disappearing ink and vandalized by Roger, not to mention that I'm pretty sure Acme just can't own an entire town. I don't know, I'm thinking too far into it. The point is, in real life, Toontown is gone. It's destroyed. Judge Doom won. The I-10 in California started construction in 1947. The same year Who Framed Roger Rabbit takes place. Just a throwaway line that didn't end up being used. In the original script, it's mentioned that the same Toon who killed Eddie's brother was the hunter who killed Bambi's mom, Judge Doom. The cartoon that plays in the theater Eddie and Roger hide out in is 1949 short Goofy Gymnastics. Reminder that this movie takes place in 1947. Boy, I hope someone got fired for that blunder. Another dating error here on a throwaway joke. During the scene when Doom raids the bar Roger is hiding in, a drunk patron named Angelo claims he's seen the rabbit, and then wraps his arm around an imaginary friend and says, "Say hello, Harvey." This is a reference to the 1950 film Harvey starring James Stewart. Now, Harvey is based on a 1944 Broadway play, but something tells me Angelo isn't the type to reference a Broadway play. Let's talk about Richard Williams a little bit more. It's time for the tragic tale of the thief and the cobbler. You see, Roger Rabbit was far from Williams' passion project. In fact, he was reluctant to work on the film because he didn't want to move to Los Angeles and didn't even like the idea of live action and animation mixed together. However, Williams eventually agreed after Spielberg and Disney promised that they would help finance and distribute a project Williams had been working on for decades, The Thief and the Cobbler. Now this was Williams' passion project, a visually extravagant epic inspired by the Arabian Nights. This insanely ambitious film was to feature minimal dialogue and highlights a lot of the techniques seen in the opening short for Who Framed Roger Rabbit. In 1964, Williams illustrated a series of books by Idris Shah, which were tales of Mullah Nasruddin, a sort of wise fool in Near Eastern folklore. Williams then began producing a film based on Nasruddin's stories. That's right, he just started going. It's the beauty of animation. Like, here's the paper, it's all yours, buddy, have fun. Eventually the production grew more and more, hiring renowned animator Ken Harris as chief animator. However, the entire production was self-funded and still kind of a side project for the animators. Richard Williams was producing commercials and television films such as The Christmas Carol to help fund the project. Eventually, in 1978, a Saudi prince named Mohammed bin Faisal Al Saud funded a 10-minute test sequence for $100,000. Williams chose one of the most difficult scenes to animate, and production missed 2 deadlines and ultimately cost $250,000. While Faisal was impressed by the outcome, he backed out of further funding due to the issues. Production stalled for a while as Williams shopped around a 20-minute cut to various distributors. This cut is what helped convince Spielberg and Zemeckis to hire Williams for Roger Rabbit. Motivated by finally funding his dream project, Richard Williams hunkered down and battled through making Roger Rabbit. Through the 14 months, Williams barely got any sleep, but with a large team of professionals was able to get it done relatively on time. Shortly after Roger Rabbit's success, The Thief and the Cobbler was finally put into full production by Warner Brothers. That's right, Warner Brothers. That's not Disney or Amblin. Predictably enough, Williams was very unpredictable with his deadlines. According to rumor, Williams was treating production almost like he was working with film, animating more than he needed and trimming accordingly. He was also experimenting with hand-drawn 3-dimensional movements that took extra time to conceive. It's almost like he was, working on his passion project. Warner Brothers had implemented a 1991 deadline that production missed. By the 91 deadline, Williams only had 10 to 15 minutes of screen time left to finish. That's when Warner Brothers made an absolutely heartbreaking decision. You see, Warner Brothers had signed a deal with the Completion Bond Company to ensure the studio was given a finished film. If the film was not completed, then they would finish the film under their management. Enter Jean Mccurdy. Jean Mccurdy took over Warner Brothers Animation in 1989. She is largely responsible for Warner Brothers' shift towards television animation over feature animation. After supervising shows such as The Smurfs, Mccurdy was well versed in making animation on a budget, not necessarily always a bad thing. During her tenure, she oversaw the creation of great shows like Tiny Toons, Animaniacs, Freakazoid, and more. However, it was clear Mccurdy did not care for The Thief and the Cobbler's wild, increasingly expensive production. An animator even found 40 minutes of 35mm dailies in Mccurdy's trash. When a rough cut was finally shown in '92 without a final reel, reception was low, and Warner Brothers backed out of the project entirely. The Completion Bond Company took over production and ousted Richard Williams. The Completion Bond Company hired Fred Calvert to complete the film as quickly and cheaply as possible. "I didn't really want to do it," Calvert said, "but if I didn't do it, it would have been given off to the lowest bidder. And I took it as a way to try and preserve something and at least get the thing on screen and let it be seen." Oddly enough, around 18 minutes of completed animation was cut, and the film was turned into a typical Disney-style musical. Calvert took 18 months to finish this version, with much of the movie featuring new animated scenes produced on a much lower television-like budget. This new animation was produced by freelance animators in LA, and the musical numbers were animated by different animation houses around the world. This rushed production resulted in a cookie-cutter cartoon with jarring inconsistencies between Williams and Calvert's animation, horrendously dull songs, and hodgepodge plot. Allied Productions released Calvert's version under the title Princess and the Cobbler, but most people might remember it under the Miramax release Arabian Night. Princess and the Cobbler was released in '93, while Arabian Night was released in '95. They both bombed spectacularly at box office and are generally forgotten movies. It's a sad end to a movie that spent 41 years in production, but the Richard Williams version still lives on. Roy Disney wanted to restore Williams' version in the early 2000s, but that project never came to fruition. In 2006, Garrett Gilchrist created a fan restoration of The Thief and the Cobbler. Gilchrist worked with numerous animators from the film and even reanimated some missing frames himself in order to finish a full cut of Williams' version. This version is known as the recobbled cut and is considered one of the most important fan edits of all time. So yeah, I know we spent a lot of time on that one, and honestly, I glossed over a lot about this story. It's really worth looking more into, but the reason I put The Thief and the Cobbler in here is because not only is the recobbled cut something you should definitely check out if you're a fan of Roger Rabbit, but this was the entire reason Richard Williams even took Roger Rabbit on. This was his treasure planet. And in the end, he had all but 10 minutes completed before getting his project ripped away and completely trashed. What a story. A lot more Roger Rabbit shorts were planned on being produced. The fourth Roger Rabbit short, Hair in My Soup, was planned to be released before Toy Story in 1995, but was canceled after Spielberg pulled out. 3 other shorts, Clean and Oppressed, Beach Blanket Bay, and Bronco Bustin' Bunny, were announced but never produced. I also love these props used in the films of Unseen Baby Herman cartoons. It really bums me out that these were never produced. We'll talk more about Roger's future a little later, but ultimately, all I want is more of these animated shorts. Remember that unproduced prequel, Who Discovered Roger Rabbit? It was supposed to include a song early on in the movie called This Only Happens in the Movies, which is sung by Roger's childhood friend during an audition. This was one of 5 songs written by Alan Menken for the unproduced prequel. In 2008, Broadway actress Kelly Butler released her debut album Faith, Trust, and Pixie Dust, and included the song in the album. The album is a collection of Butler's favorite Disney songs. Damn, Kelly, one of your favorite Disney songs is a song that was never released from an unproduced prequel to Who Framed Roger Rabbit? Kelly, you are underground as hell. Speaking of hell, hot in hell, oven. Hotter than hell. Hotter than hell. Get it? The logo for Cloverleaf looks awfully like a freeway intersection. Eddie's gun was gifted to him by Yosemite Sam, who writes, "Thanks for getting me out of the hooskow." Not much to say about this one. I don't know why I put it this far down the iceberg, but I did always find it odd that the gun switches from a cartoon to a prop multiple times. Anyways, Eddie defends gun-happy criminals. Alright guys, that's going to do it for part 2. Thanks again for watching. I'm going to try to get part 3 out by next Sunday, but I'm just going to warn you, we're only about halfway down this iceberg. I'm going to have to do a lot of catching up with this part 3, so it might be late. I will let you guys know on my Twitch channel. That's right, follow me on Twitch. We stream every day at 7 p.m. Please tune in. And until then, I'll see you guys in part 3. Later.